What was supposed to be a simple celebrity interview turned into one of the most dramatic moments in morning television history. In less than a minute, a casual conversation became a heated confrontation that ended with a famous guest walking off the set while millions watched at home. Denzel Washington arrived at the Good Morning America studio expecting a normal interview. He was there to discuss his latest film and his long career in Hollywood. The audience was excited to see the legendary actor, and the atmosphere in the studio was energetic and positive. Michael Strahan, the host, seemed ready for what everyone thought would be a pleasant conversation with one of the film industry's biggest stars. The interview started like any other. Denzel walked onto the stage with his usual calm confidence. He shook Michael's hand and took his seat while the audience applauded enthusiastically. Michael began with standard questions about Denzel's new movie, asking about his character and what attracted him to the role. Denzel answered thoughtfully, explaining the depth of the character and why the story was meaningful to him. Everything seemed to be going well. But then Michael changed direction. He leaned back in his chair with a slight smirk and asked a question that immediately changed the mood in the room. He brought up the topic of older actors and whether they were taking opportunities away from younger talent. He mentioned Denzel's age and asked if it was time for him to step back and let the next generation have their chance. The audience went silent. The awkwardness spread through the studio like a wave. Denzel's expression barely changed, but those watching closely could see his jaw tighten. He took a slow breath before responding. He corrected Michael about his exact age and explained that he was still working because he loved what he did and people still wanted to see his work. He stated clearly that age had nothing to do with talent or relevance. Michael laughed, but it was an uncomfortable laugh. He continued pushing, saying that Hollywood was changing and talking about diversity and new voices. He suggested that maybe it was time for people like Denzel to pass the torch instead of holding on to it so tightly. Denzel shifted in his seat. His voice stayed calm, but there was now an edge to it. He asked Michael to clarify what he meant by guys like me. He explained that he had been passing the torch his entire career. He had mentored many young actors, produced films that gave opportunities to new talent, and opened doors that had been closed for people who looked like him. He asked Michael to be more specific about what he was trying to say. Michael seemed to realize he had touched a sensitive topic, but instead of backing off, he doubled down. He said he was just saying what people were thinking. He mentioned that Denzel had already had his time in the spotlight, won awards, and made money. He asked if at some point it became selfish to keep taking up all the attention. The audience gasped. People started murmuring to each other, clearly shocked by what Michael had just said. Denzel stared at Michael for a long moment without blinking. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but powerful. He questioned whether Michael was calling him selfish for continuing to work and do what he had dedicated his life to. Then he turned the tables. He asked Michael how long he had been hosting the show. Michael looked confused and asked what that had to do with anything. Denzel firmly told him to answer the question. Michael said he had been hosting for several years, clearly getting defensive. Denzel then asked how many times Michael had been told he was too old for the job. How many times had someone suggested he should step aside for someone younger? How many times had anyone questioned whether he deserved to be there? Denzel's voice was rising now, not shouting, but definitely more intense than before. Michael did not answer. He just sat there, trying to find words but unable to speak. Denzel continued, pointing out the difference between them. He explained that he had earned his place in the industry through decades of hard work, dedication, and talent. He had fought for every role and every opportunity. Nothing was handed to him. But Michael, Denzel said, had been a football player who got a television job because he was famous and had a nice smile. And now he was questioning whether Denzel deserved to still be working. The tension in the studio was unbearable. Michael's face turned red, and it was clear he was getting angry. He protested that it was not fair and that he had worked hard too. He said he had earned his spot. Denzel shot back, asking if Michael had really earned it or just gotten lucky. From where Denzel was sitting, it looked like Michael was exactly what he was accusing Denzel of being. He was taking up a spot that could go to a real journalist, someone who actually studied broadcasting and put in years learning the craft. But instead, they gave it to a former athlete because he was popular. Michael stood up from his chair, pointing his finger at Denzel. He said Denzel did not get to come on his show and disrespect him like that. He called it his house. Denzel stood up too. Though he was calm, he was clearly not backing down. He corrected Michael, saying it was not his house but ABC's house. Michael was just working there, same as everyone else. And if they were talking about respect, Denzel said Michael had lost his respect the moment he suggested Denzel was too old to do his job. Michael was practically shaking now. He insisted that he was the host and Denzel was the guest, and that Denzel should not talk to him that way on his show. Denzel responded coldly, suggesting that maybe Michael should act like a professional host instead of an insecure bully. A real host knows how to have a conversation without insulting their guests, he said. A real host prepares thoughtful questions that actually mean something. But Michael just wanted to create drama and get a rise out of Denzel so he could have a viral moment. Denzel congratulated him on getting his moment. The producers were clearly panicking behind the scenes. People were running around, probably trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let things play out. Michael was breathing heavily, his face still red, trying to regain control of the situation. Michael told Denzel that if he did not like the questions, there was the door. Nobody was forcing him to stay. Denzel laughed bitterly. He said that was the classic move when you cannot handle the heat, you kick out the guest. Michael had asked him a disrespectful question, and Denzel had given him an honest answer. Now Michael could not handle it. Michael insisted he was not kicking Denzel out but suggested that if Denzel was going to be disrespectful, maybe this was not the right place for him. Denzel's voice rose again. He pointed out that Michael had started this with his comments about stepping back and being selfish. Michael had questioned Denzel's right to keep working and doing what he loved. And when Denzel defended himself and pointed out Michael's own hypocrisy, suddenly Denzel was the one being disrespectful. Michael tried to defend himself, saying he was not being ageist and was just asking a legitimate question about the industry. But Denzel cut him off. He said Michael knew exactly what he was doing. Michael was trying to make Denzel look bad, trying to paint him as some old person who did not know when to quit. But he had picked the wrong person that day. Denzel had been in the business longer than Michael had been out of football, and he knew when someone was trying to play games with him. Michael was visibly flustered now, looking to his producers for help. He said they needed to go to commercial. But Denzel interrupted, saying Michael did not get to cut away now. Michael had wanted to have this conversation on live television, so they would have it. Denzel asked why Michael had really brought him there that day. It was not to talk about his movie, was it? Michael wanted to stir up controversy, wanted headlines, wanted people talking about Good Morning America. Well, he got it. Michael tried to compose himself and suggested they take a step back. Denzel demanded to know what that meant. Did Michael want to pretend this did not happen? Pretend he had not just insulted Denzel and his entire career on national television? Denzel told Michael what his problem was. Michael had gotten comfortable. He thought because he had this job and sat in that chair every morning, he could say whatever he wanted to whoever he wanted. But he forgot that respect is earned, not given. The audience was completely silent now. Everyone was watching this confrontation unfold, unable to believe what they were seeing. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others seemed almost excited, knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Michael's voice was shaking when he spoke again. He said he had respect and that millions of people watched the show every day. They respected him. Denzel challenged this. Did they respect him, or did they just watch because the show was on in the morning while they ate breakfast? There was a difference between being popular and being respected. Based on how Michael had conducted himself that day, Denzel was starting to understand why some people might question which one Michael actually was. That comment seemed to push Michael over the edge. His professional facade completely crumbled. He shouted at Denzel to get off his show, his voice cracking. He was serious, he said. Denzel needed to get off his stage right now. Denzel did not move. He just stood there, staring at Michael with a look that was both disappointed and defiant. He said there was the real Michael Strahan, not the smiling television host, not the friendly former athlete, just an insecure man who could not handle being called out on his own show. Michael screamed again, completely losing control. His finger pointed toward the exit, and his whole body was tense with anger. The producers were definitely trying to cut away now, but the cameras kept rolling. This was live television, and there was no stopping what was happening. Denzel took a slow breath. When he spoke again, his voice was calm and controlled, which somehow made his words even more powerful. Michael wanted him to leave. Fine, he would leave. But not because Michael told him to. He was leaving because he had too much self-respect to stay on a show hosted by someone who clearly had none. He reached up and removed his microphone carefully. He placed it on the chair where he had been sitting, taking his time, making sure everyone saw what he was doing. The gesture was deliberate and dignified. Denzel continued speaking as he straightened his jacket. He told Michael how sad it was. Michael had an opportunity that day. He had one of the most respected actors in Hollywood sitting right there, ready to have a real conversation. He could have asked about craft, about the journey, about lessons learned over 40 years in the business. But instead, Michael chose to go for the cheap shot. He tried to make Denzel look bad so he could look good, and it had backfired spectacularly. Michael was breathing hard, his fists clenched at his sides. He asked if Denzel was done. Denzel said almost. He offered some free advice since Michael clearly needed it. The next time Michael had a guest on the show, he should try actually respecting them. Try asking questions that matter. Try being a host instead of someone who just tries to provoke people. What Michael did that day was not journalism or entertainment. It was just sad. The entire studio was frozen. Nobody was moving or making a sound. It was like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Michael's voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke, but it was filled with anger. He told Denzel to get out of his sight. Denzel smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew they had won. He said gladly and wished Michael good luck with the rest of his show. Something told him Michael was going to need it. He turned and started walking toward the exit. His stride was confident and unhurried. He was not running away or storming off in anger. He was leaving on his own terms with his dignity intact. The camera followed him as he walked past stunned crew members and shocked audience members, who could not believe what they had just witnessed. Just before he reached the door, Denzel stopped and turned back one more time. Michael was still standing on the stage, looking lost and embarrassed. The host who had been so confident at the beginning now looked small and defeated. Denzel called out across the studio one final time. He said that, for what it was worth, he hoped Michael never stopped doing what he loved. He hoped nobody ever told him he was too old or that he should step aside, because despite what happened that day, nobody deserved that. Not even Michael. With those final words, Denzel Washington walked out of the Good Morning America studio, leaving behind one of the most explosive confrontations in morning television history. The cameras stayed on the empty doorway for a moment before cutting back to Michael, who stood alone on the stage, surrounded by a silent audience and a crew that did not know what to do. Michael tried to say something, tried to regain some control, but the words would not come. He looked at the camera, then at the audience, then back at the camera. His mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. For the first time in his career as a host, Michael Strahan was completely speechless. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. In less than a minute of confrontation, Denzel Washington had completely dismantled the host, exposed his tactics, and walked away with his reputation intact while leaving Michael's in ruins. The audience sat in stunned silence, still processing what they had just seen. Crew members whispered to each other. Phones were already out, and everyone knew this moment would be replayed millions of times across social media within hours. When they came back from commercial, Michael was sitting at the desk again, with his co-hosts trying to support him. He attempted to make a joke about the intensity of what had happened, but his voice was shaky, and the laugh that followed was forced and hollow. They tried to move on to the next segment, but nobody in the studio, or watching at home, was thinking about anything else. They were all thinking about what they had just witnessed: Denzel's calm dismantling of Michael's attack, and how the host had completely lost control of his own show. The incident would become one of the most memorable moments in morning television history. Not because it was planned or scripted, but because it was raw and real. It showed what happens when someone tries to disrespect a legend and gets called out for it. It showed the difference between someone who has earned their place through talent and hard work and someone who might still be learning how to properly use the platform they have been given. The door through which Denzel had walked remained closed, a physical barrier that represented the bridge that had been burned between host and guest. What happened had happened, and now everyone involved would have to live with the consequences.